Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Amplifying the Arts webinar. I'm Ashley Lucier, the Executive Director of Amp Up Arts, and I'm so glad that everyone is here with us today. If you're new, Amplifying the Arts is a free monthly webinar series where we highlight the people, programs, and strategies that are shaping arts education across Alabama. And tonight's session is all about advocacy for arts educators. So real world strategies that you can use to grow support for your programs, to connect with decision makers, and to really kind of amplify the power of arts in your schools and your communities. So I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Rob Lyda. Sorry, I'm a hand talker, so it's going everywhere. Rob's a longtime music educator. He is the immediate past president of the Alabama Music Educators Association. He's also on the council for the Alabama State Council of the Arts, and he's a passionate advocate who has helped champion arts education, especially in music, across Alabama. And I know that that's only a very small portion of what you actually do, Rob. But I want to thank you for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you want to add to your introduction before we jump into our conversation?
No, I'm just glad to be here. And yeah, it's start of a new school year. I know it's a crazy time for everybody, so I'm glad for everyone that's here and people that are going to watch after. So
yes, yeah, it is a really intense time. I was like, oh, I'm going to ask him to do it in August, but I know that he's got a crazy time right now. So I wanted to kind of start off first. We always kind of do this with individuals that come on, a little bit about like your own personal journey, as an educator, as an artist. Can you share a little bit about your journey as a music educator and kind of what involved or what led you to become so involved in advocacy work? If there was like a moment or kind of an overarching thing that got you involved in it.
Yeah, I will be the first to tell you, and I've said this in several other webinars and articles that I've been in, this is the last thing that I thought I was going to do with my life, to be a music educator, to be an educator of any kind, because I come from a family of educators. And so I heard a lot growing up. Your grandmother taught me, or your dad taught me, or, everybody in my family was a teacher. And at every level of education that I have, all the way from kindergarten all the way to PhD, there's someone that was one of my teachers or professors that someone in my family taught. And so I put a stake in the sand early on and said, I will never be a teacher, but here we are. And it's because of it's passionate arts educators that I had, band directors and music teachers. My dad was a band director. My uncle was a band director. So I kind of, advocacy, I guess, seeps in your blood when you watch your family have to advocate for their own students and their own programs. Yeah. And so my dad was a middle school band director for 40 years. And he had a really good program, really good support system. I won't say it was perfect, but he had a really good setup. My uncle, on the other hand, is a fabulous music educator, had a great program, but he was one county over and it did not have the same support. So he had boosters that worked really hard, but it was a rural area. And I have vivid memories of going with my uncle on weekends to go to pawn shops and buy instruments for kids. And he would buy them out of his pocket. My aunt and uncle, they set aside, money every month, and they would buy supplies for the kids. And, he would put it back in his band program, and he would fix instruments he found at pawn shops or garage sales or different things. So that was one of the things that I saw. But my first kind of venture into advocacy was when I was in the 5th grade. And we got a new school, and I grew up in Panama City, and I grew up in Panama City Beach, and we were getting a new middle school, and the middle school was going to be grades 4 through 8, but I was in 4th grade the last year that our elementary school was going to be a K-6 school. And we had a great music teacher, Miss D. Lyda, who, she was just like legendary. she had a choir that everybody wanted to be in, and I was in the third grade choir, and then I got to third and fourth grade choir, and then when I got to fifth grade, new music teachers, and they said they weren't going to have an elementary choir. They were going to have a middle school choir for 6 through 8, a middle school band, and they were just going to have some music classes for the fourth and fifth graders. So I wanted a choir. So I launched a campaign and got together my friends that had been in the fourth grade choir the year before. And we started writing cards to the music teacher and, did all kinds of things and would talk to her whenever we would see her. And I got in trouble for this one. I asked to go to the bathroom one day and I snuck out, and the fourth and fifth graders were upstairs. So I had to sneak downstairs, and I went in the back door of the office and put letters and cards and things I had gotten my classmates to make in her box. And so finally, after several weeks of, persistent bugging, she gave in and she started a fourth and fifth grade choir. And we were pulled out during the day. And so that was really the first time that I saw that the fruits of advocacy labor, it was something that was near and dear to me and I wanted. And so I started there. And then as I went through my education, I still didn't want to be a music teacher at that point. It was when I got into high school and I had a fabulous band director, and I wanted to be a band director like him. We had 3 high schools in that time in my hometown, and they had 3 really good band programs, 3 really strong booster organizations, but there was no money for the bands. It was only what they made. And so I watched our parents form this group that went every month to the school board. And for 3 years, they were persistent. For 3 years, they went to every school board meeting. And during the public comment section, they would get up and they would give a fact about the importance of music education. And they would talk about the needs of the band programs. And after 3 years, the school board finally said, if you people will stop coming to the board meeting and taking time, how much money do you need? And they gave them the money. And for 3 years, they made a commitment to give each one of the band programs like $100,000 for 3 years. And so I saw that. And then when I went to college, I got involved with, it was CMENC at the time, but it was the collegiate version of the National Music Teacher Organization, which is now the National Association for Music Education. And so I was really involved with CMENC, and I became the state president for CMENC, and I got to go to Washington, D.C. And I tell people when I go into advocacy meetings, there's 2 people that I have on my shoulder. One is my undergraduate methods professor, Dr. Diane Orlovsky from Troy University. And the other one is Diane Johnson, who was the music supervisor for Jefferson County Schools. And so when I got to go to Washington, D.C., I got to go with Diane, and we got to go meet our elected officials in DC. And so Diane was the type of person that you heard her coming before you ever saw her, because she had high heels and they went click, 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 click. And so Congress with her and hearing those click, 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 and you could hear her click, click, click over everybody else's. And we went into those offices and just watching her interact in the poise and the ease in which she spoke to all of these staffers, and she could turn a conversation on a dime. I vividly remember one staffer going, well, I was in band, but I wasn't any good. And my band director really didn't want me to play very loud because I played flat. And in fact, he took my mouthpiece away one year when we went to school. And Diane goes, well, honey, I hate you weren't in my band program, because you would have loved it, And so watching her turn those people that were starting out down a dark path of not being forced into, putty in her hand, it was amazing to watch her do that. So I think those were all formative experiences for me, personal experiences that I realized it came with part of the job. And so I knew when I graduated from college that advocacy was just part of the work that all arts educators have to do. I think sometimes that really shocks a lot of our young arts educators, is they've gone through, great experiences in their elementary, middle, high school, and they go to college and they've had these great experiences, and they get into the job and they realize that some days it's like you have to fight for everything, it feels like. And so for me, I was very lucky that I had those formative experiences, and that I also had family that I could depend on. So like my first year, I must say I talked to my dad or uncle every day about something like, how do you do this? And so I was
Mhm.
really lucky that I had built-in mentors. So so that's kind of what got me down this path, and I've never stopped the advocacy since I started it. So
Well, and I mean, you brought up like so many good points in there too, the different levels of advocacy, even as a student, all the way up to going to DC. And I think you're right too, that so many times, I mean, when I was an educator, not in the arts, but in English, and I can imagine, it's probably not very different in the arts, but you don't talk about like advocating for what you teach, because especially when you're going through your education program, because you're so focused on like learning to teach, that it's like that's a whole nother layer of having to worry about, okay, so now I have the tools to teach the kids mentally or academically, but maybe not the actual tools to teach them, especially in music. And yeah, music is so expensive. My 14-year-old, he played trombone for a while, and that was a pricey little instrument to get him. So
right.
trying to fund a whole band, I mean, that's crazy. But I think too, part of that kind of maybe like apprehension with some educators is that, a lot of times we do kind of see advocacy, like you said, is like going to DC, talking to senators. And like that is like that very, grass tops kind of level of advocacy. But as you just said, you also have those very small, or what seems small, but turns out to be really significant examples of like giving letters, talking to school boards. So thinking about that, and I like to ask this to a lot of people that come on here about advocacy, because they all kind of have a little bit of a different answer to this, but how would you define advocacy when it comes to arts education?
So one of the things that that's a really good question. One of the things that when I think of advocacy, I think of it in three ways. So I think there's three types of advocacy that arts educators have to constantly be involved in. Of course, there's reactionary advocacy, where something happens and you have to rally all of your support system to, like we saw an example of that in arts ed last year with one of the House bills that came up, that
The
like
theater?
for the theater one, and
Yes,
then
yes.
there's always unintended consequences with any piece of legislation that we don't think about. And so one of the unintended consequences was that they wouldn't be able to use females to play male parts, and vice versa in theatrical productions. And so that was very reactionary. You had to get your people together and you had to figure a unified voice and you had to figure the best way to advocate. And I thought our theater colleagues did a brilliant job
Mhm.
in doing that, and really opening the eyes to our legislators that this would have an impact on real
Yeah,
students and teachers in their districts. And
yeah.
the thing was, you have to be careful with any of those bills, is you don't want it to come across, because the intent that they were coming out was to keep kids safe, and we all want to keep kids safe.
Mhm.
So you've got to be very careful in those reactionary times how you message when you go forward. So there's that reactionary advocacy.
Yeah.
Then there's like what I call maintenance advocacy. It's that advocacy you do every day, building relationships, inviting people to performances,
Mhm.
making sure you're seen at different things, connecting with parents, connecting with community members. And that's very important. Building those relationships are important, because then one day when you do have to engage in like reactionary, you can call on those people you built
Those
relationships.
relationships, yeah.
But then one that we overlook a lot is what I call like forecasting advocacy or predictive advocacy. And that's one of my friends in Florida. She's the executive director of the Florida Music Educator Association. Kathy Sands said to me several years ago, and it made so much sense. She said, we've got to look at red states and red states and blue states and blue states. Because a lot of times we're not, we're never going to get a lot of people in Alabama to do things that are done in a lot of blue states, and vice versa. You're not going to
Mhm.
get a lot of blue states to go do things that are happening in red states. But if you look for that predictive advocacy, like what is happening in the red states that are similar size, that have
Happening.
similar things, and then you look at because what they're happening in their state, like some of the things that are happening with literacy education and some other areas in just the general education arena. Like 10 years ago, I was saying, hey, folks, we need to be looking at this because this is going to come to us. And sometimes people can look at you when you're doing predictive advocacy and going, you're being a little bit of a chicken little. The sky is not falling. Well, it's not falling now, but it's going to come to us eventually. And we can see that a lot of bills that have gone through our legislature the past few years have actually been enacted in other states first. And then Alabama has tweaked them a little bit, done some things, and then we've introduced them. So we have an opportunity, if we're engaging in all three of those advocacy, and it might not be that you, one person, engage. Maybe you have a group of people that are engaging in the predictive advocacy, and you have a group that's really looking at building the relationships, and then you have the people that are really good at handling crisis situations that are your reactionary advocacy people. And so you take that approach to it, and then you're constantly building this portfolio of advocacy that isn't just tiring one person or one small group of people out. You can have people that are working on different facets of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking about, this is kind of more in a positive way because it's more funding for the school, but even like the RAISE Act that just went through, that's Alabama was only one, I think, of 4 states that didn't have a student-based funding. But when it went through legislative session last year, and I remember I was at some of the committee hearings, it wasn't that like, oh, California's been doing this forever, New York's been doing this forever. It was, guys, Mississippi did this 5 years ago and we haven't done it yet. It was very much, it was looking at, even though that ended up, thankfully being positive for our schools, that it was following what the states, that have similar cultures or values, that what they've done, and Alabama kind of copies a lot of that sometimes. So that's a great point. I do think that is one that we kind of forget about. And then it ends up turning into reactionary advocacy because we didn't have that kind of prep beforehand.
Well, and the RAISE Act is a great example of, it has great intended outcomes, to change the funding model. But that's going to take a type of advocacy that we're going to have to stay on it to make sure that the funding is allocated in ways in which that we advocated for it to be advocated or to allocated. Because it would be very easy for some people to, I don't want to say misuse the money, but reappropriate the money in ways that are not in the spirit of what the legislators wanted it or how they wanted it done. So that's that advocacy, that building relationships and staying, that kind of maintenance advocacy. So it's not like you hear all of a sudden that they're going to use the money to do, something that none of us want, but
get a big football field or
I'll say
it. But that is, it kind of all falls, in a line, in a really nice line, the 3 types that you talked about. And as teachers, there are certain things that they can't do because they are in a classroom all day long with kids. And I think sometimes maybe that's where we feel like, oh, like I don't really know what to do. Like I'm too busy with this. So what do you kind of think that they often misunderstand? We talked about a few points of that, but what do you think is kind of the big thing that's a little bit misunderstood about advocacy for educators specifically, or ones that you've helped with?
So I think one of the things, there's 2 things, and it's funny because I just dealt with one of these today. I had a very exhausted already music teacher send out an SOS, and they were like, I'm ready to storm and write letters and all of this because there was something in their situation that's not going well. And I agree with them. The thing that was not going well is not optimal, but writing letters and venting, essentially, is what it is not going to really win or influence people. You've got to be really strategic with the way you move about your advocacy and really think through the options and think through the process of how you're going to advocate. And then when this happens, what happens next? And so I think a lot of times we have these knee-jerk reactions to we hear something and we want to do something about it. But sometimes the best advocacy is taking a step back, observing all of the elements of the situation, and trying to see the different points of view, of why whatever is happening or is going to happen. It's sort of like that, To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch, you never understand a man till you walk in his, his shoes or skin. And so really trying to figure out, like, well, why would they think this, or why would they want this, or why, and trying to think, and then figure out what are the ways that you can counter those points, and think both sides of the coin. The other thing that I think is that a lot of times music educators and arts educators in general, we're all busy, and we're so engrossed in our programs, and so engrossed in what we're doing with our students and our communities, that advocacy is something we see other people should do, because it feels like one of those things, like, I don't have time for this. Isn't there someone else that can do this for us? And the best advocate for your students is you.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, people will ask me curriculums, like, what curriculum to use? I was like, well, I pull a little from this, but I put together what works best for my students, because I know what the needs of my students are. The needs of my students this year are different than the needs of my students last year. They're different the needs of the students somewhere else. I know what my students need to develop and have a sequential music education. Same thing with advocacy. You know what your needs are better than anybody else. And so, it's you figuring out how to articulate your needs and what your program needs, and then training other people to be able to articulate those same needs without you. And so those are the two things I really think is, there's people that, why me? I don't have time for this. Someone else needs. Yeah.
So kind of jumping off that, because I think, I remember even when I really started getting into looking at more advocacy once I got outside the classroom, because I never thought of it when I was in the classroom ever. And but even when we're like, okay, so I need to know, like, what I need to know, right? I need to be educated about it. I need to know what I need, but what does that look like? What is that a practical, just kind of everyday way that a teacher could advocate for that program? If they know, now they're like, I figured out what I need. I know what my ask is. What do I do next?
So social media is a powerful tool. It's also a danger. And you need to make sure you understand what all of the policies related to social media are for your specific situation. But one thing that several years ago, before I was president of AMEA, there's so many good things that happen in the state, in arts education every day and in music education. And so, especially during the pandemic, when we were all having to go in our homes and we didn't know what was going to happen, we created a hashtag, ALA for Music Ed, that we have encouraged our members, and it took time to train them. Anytime something in your program is going on, put that hashtag on it. And then
and that's still one that's being used. I recognize that. When you said it, I was like, I've seen that.
we still use it, and it's our advocacy hashtag. We started it around right before COVID, and it took a while to get members in the habit of it. But now, if you go to almost any social media platform and you put that hashtag in, thousands of examples of arts or music education are going to come up in our state. And so when we go to DC, I tell people, at the federal level, look at our hashtag. When I've been in Montgomery, I've told people, and then you can tell your local people and get your communities in the, kind of your brand, get your communities involved in that, to know that brand that's there. But, the other thing is, one thing I've thought a lot about in all of the arts, I think we can, we're a little guilty of this, if guilty is the right word, is we're really good at letting people see the finished product. We're really good at letting people come to the concert, to the performance, the art show, whatever it is. But we very rarely let people see the process. And so they don't, and a lot of people, when they see not necessarily student performances, but like, if you're going to go spend a night at the symphony, or a night at the, Broadway in Birmingham, or wherever it is, the ballet, whatever it might be, a lot of times you're going for an entertainment purpose. So you're going to be entertained. You're kind of disconnected from, there's a whole process that happened to get you to there. Same thing with arts education. So I think the more we can let people see nuggets of the process that lead up to the performance, the better. So social media, or invite elected officials in to see the learning that happens in your classroom. And so it make the invisible visible. Make sure that people are able to come in and see that process of learning that happens. Because I think sometimes, and I know when I was a band director, people would call and say, hey, can the band come play here next Tuesday? And it's like, well, no, I can't prepare these four pieces of music you want on a Thursday and have them ready for Tuesday. But the general population doesn't understand that. We just don't, because they're able to buy a ticket on Ticketmaster or wherever and just go to a performance, and it's there for them. So I think, leveraging social media, and then using social media to show the process and the product, and then inviting people in. I know people have informances from time to time where they will just invite parents in, or like our PE teacher does PE with pals, and they invite the parents in to come and spend PE with their kids. And we've talked about doing that with, art and music. Like, what if we had a music with pals, or, something to let people come in and see what it's like to learn in our classrooms, because they don't always understand. One more example, and then I'll give you the question back. But we just went to a new schedule this year, and I had a parent stop me yesterday and say, "Hey, thank you for the new schedule." And I was like, "Okay, I didn't expect that at all. We just did it." So we're on a rotating schedule this year, where every 4 days we see the kids on it. So that way we don't have to worry about Monday you miss. And the way that we got there was, I sat down and I looked at all of our data, because people like data, and was like, do you realize that any kid that had art or music last year on a Monday, they should have had like 32 classes, they only got 17 because of holidays, field trips, weather days, different things.
Yeah.
Friday, the same thing. So I said, if we go on a rotating schedule where it's every 4 days we're rotating back through our special rotation, the kids are going to get a lot more arts education. They're going to get like 40 music classes. Everyone has the potential to get 40 music classes a year instead of 30. And when I showed the data there, and I didn't know this, but one of the teachers at our curriculum night, I had made a chart and it was shared out with the teachers. Well, one of the parents asked, so she showed the chart to the parents so they could understand why we were making this change. And then everybody was like, wow, this is great. Like, my kid's getting more art. They're getting more music. They're getting more library. They're getting more technology. This is great. Like, yeah, we're all for this. So we're not really good at pulling back that curtain and letting people see why we do the things we do, or the process of how things work. They just see the final product, and then they don't understand that a lot of work went in, and a lot of learning went into that process. So letting people see behind that curtain.
That's a really good point. I heard a story, just last week, we were kind of talking before we came on here about like the skills too of arts. Like, yes, we do these amazing performances, we have these amazing exhibitions, but what are those other skills that are great for your students to have? And the example that I heard was like, when a car factory moves into a state and they're getting millions and millions of tax incentives, whatever, that they're moving into the state. And they have legislators, councilmen, people come. They don't just show them the showroom. They take them behind the scenes. They take them to see the workers, and they're saying, this is what we're doing for your community. We're providing jobs. We're giving them these skills. And, they're like, they have it down how to advocate to this, because they're showing not only, yes, we make these products and we're selling them and all that, but this is the other, like you said, the backside of it that is also producing really great skills for your community that they need. And, she was like, arts can learn a little bit from that.
Right. So well, when I used to go to DC, I've gone to DC off and on for like 27 years. Some years it's every summer I go, and then I'll take a few years break and go back. But one of the statistics that we used to take to our elected officials in DC, was something we got from UAB. Like when they would recruit faculty to come in, and UAB hospital system is one of the best in the country. And when they would recruit new faculty members to come in, one of the things they would highlight were the arts experiences that are available in the Metro Birmingham area, because the doctors that are coming in and the professors, they want to be able to engage in the arts, but they want their children to engage in arts too. And so that's the one thing that stuck with me when I heard that. It was probably 25 years ago when we got a hold of that statistic. But like, that's very important when people are looking to move into your community. They want to know what are the arts, especially if it's, those things like UAB. I mean, they want to know what are the arts experiences. So they highlight the ballet and the symphony and the theaters and the concert venues and so that's really important. Like that arts ecosystem is so important to the vitality of a community.
Yeah, they did the same thing in Montgomery when the Hyundai plant came in. They took them to the Shakespeare Festival. They took them to the Montgomery Museum of Arts, and and that was the same thing. It was like, this is what you can experience, if you bring the factory here and they live here. This is what they can get. So yeah, it's important to think of it that way too. And a lot of times too, that we just kind of we were talking about those skills and, how do we prove. I think there's always this debate of like, how do we prove like art should just be there because it makes us great humans and we deserve to have art, but also there is that side where people are talking about data, they're talking about student success, they're talking about academic achievement. So if a teacher is like, I'm in a district that really wants to know what is the connection what is my ROI if I, give more funding to arts education, what advice do you have for them in terms of connecting it or how they could advocate in that way if they're kind of looking at that situation?
Yeah, I think you have to know your audience. So you have to be able to speak to your audience in the way in which they will understand. And so sometimes, like, I'm not going to say who, but your viewers can probably guess. But I was in one legislative office and I made a lot of connections between football and marching band in this, office in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, to make the connection of why, you want to have that marching band at the football game. So you got to support arts education. If you want to get those kids ready to be in the marching band to support the team. And so you have to know your audience. And so, knowing your audience is very important to know with the language in which you use. The Americans for the Arts has put out some great data sheets that we use all the time. And I will tell you, when I've been in at the Alabama State House, but also been in DC, and I mentioned the billions of dollars arts education brings into our state economy, people will sit up and they will start writing and say, what was that number? And, we like a few years ago surpassed agriculture. The creative economy brings in more revenue to the economy.
It's almost close to almost being double now. And when I tell that to people, I'm like, what do you think like is a big industry? And a lot of times it's agriculture, farming. I'm like, surprise, Alabama.
Exactly. And so you have to know that language. Now, do I think that's the inherent value, in economic? No. I mean, I know I want children to have arts education and our citizens to have arts education and the arts in general, because it makes us better people and it gives us experiences that touch our hearts and humanity and soul in ways that other things I don't think do. But going and talking to a legislator like in that way, unless they are an arts person, they're not going to really understand it. But like, knowing when you need to talk the culture speak, when you need to talk the economic speak, when you need to talk about this is something that makes us that we should be proud of because it's inherently Alabama and we are Alabamians, and hitting some of the just knowing who you need to talk to in what ways, the ways in which you need to talk to them. I do think that we have to be very careful because you mentioned like with your son in the trombone, and there's these statistics that get shared every year about the correlation between like test scores and student participation, like all state band or all state choir or whatever. And correlation does not equal causation. There's a relationship there, but it might not be the relationship we think I know we love to tout those stories and love to put those out there, but there's economic filters. There are probably really smart kids. I know there are really smart kids sitting in schools all over our country that they don't get the opportunity to have arts education because their school system can't afford it. And there is that economic filter where it's usually kids that have the economic resources, they're a little bit more affluent, that they're able to do band and orchestra and maybe take theater lessons and and there's a whole segment of children that they want to have the arts. They want to do music. They're doing music in their homes, in their communities, but they're not able to do it because the school doesn't offer it, or the school doesn't I don't want to say value. That sounds horrible to say, but it might not be in alignment with the values of their home values or cultural values.
Yeah.
So I think we do have to be really careful when we use all those statistics that say, art makes you smarter, music makes you smarter, because that's we're selling people things that we can't always back up. And and the other thing that it hits me from like my graduate school days, research doesn't prove anything. It reveals things. It shows you things. It shows you connections. But research, if we're using research to prove the value of arts, we've lost.
Yeah. Yeah. You can look, I mean, exactly like you're saying, our state, there are districts, the districts that have typically very high achievement proficiencies, have, very good art teacher to student ratios. They have all those good statistics that you're talking about. Are also some of them that have, higher property tax. They have higher local income that's going into their schools, and that creates this whole disparity between what is going on in there. And I think about like the turnaround schools that we're with. The state school report cards just came out, and one of the schools now that has some of the highest proficiency rates is in Wilcox County. It's one of those elementary schools. They had almost a 93% proficiency rate in their literacy. They were failing 3 years ago. But that influx of funds and opportunities that they didn't have before completely changed their data and completely changed the perception of how people, 3 years ago, it was like, well, they're in the middle of nowhere. They don't have anything. Like, we can kind of predict what's going to happen.
Right.
But we do have to be really careful with that, because there's so many other factors that are going into those districts that.
Well, just thinking about when you infuse the arts in a school, I mean, it makes such a difference just in the culture and climate of the school.
Yeah.
It's not just about those test scores. I mean, that's a beneficiary of the climate and culture. When you have children that are joyful to come to school because they know they're going to have art that day,
yes,
or they're going to have theater, or they're going to have music, or they're going to have, dance, and they are happy to come and they're happy to learn, but because they know it's sort of like that old thing of, you get your dessert if you eat your vegetables. It's sort of the, the arts. I don't want to say they're the desserts, but they're the thing that make the vegetables. There may be the salt that makes the vegetables taste better, or whatever. I would never want to say dessert, because then that seems like you don't have to have that. But it is something that makes children want to come to school. And there is research that says that there are higher attendance rates, that when children are at school and they have the arts, that attendance tends to be higher in those schools than schools without arts programs. But yeah, I think that the arts, they do so much for us as human beings that it makes so many things joyful. And I do have a real concern in our state right now with, not just in our state, but in our country, with sometimes school can feel like, instead of we're educating students, we're training students.
Workforce development.
Yeah, we're training them for something, for something that might not even exist by the time they get out. Whereas the arts have existed for millennia, and the arts have been part of, the human condition since time began. And giving students an education in the arts teaches them skills that they're going to like. I learned how to work well with others playing in a trombone quartet, like
Yeah.
give and pull and like nonverbal communication, knowing when, this person was going to do this and this, and being able to work together as a team and create a cohesive unit. I've learned critical thinking skills through my arts classes. I've learned empathy, learned how to think outside of my situation to understand other people because of learning the music that is culturally relevant and culturally important to different groups of people, and help me to see history through a different way, or culture. And so I think we can never diminish the fact of what the arts do for us as human beings, and how the
Yeah.
arts can be used to help educate us in different ways than just the reading and math.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: it's like I tell sometimes when I talk to elected officials, I don't know anybody that doesn't want their students to read or be able to do math. Like, I want my personal children and the children I teach to be able to read and do math. I don't think that's what anyone's saying. I think we just want to make sure that they also, it should be a yes and. It should be a period. They get these things, but they don't get these because we don't have time or room for them or money for them. It should be a, they get this, and they get this, and they get this, and they can do this. So we should always look at education as a yes and.
Yeah, it is. I do agree with you. I think it is concerning when we focus more kind of on what workforce certifications are kids getting, rather than, because that's not, and even if we're looking at talking to them in a way that, the policymakers may want to hear it, that's not what companies are asking for right now. Companies are asking for people that can work together, that can think creatively, that are not just there to do a task that, frankly, AI can take care of for, half of us now. Like, we need that innovation. And we keep talking about, so much in workforce development, innovation. And, a computer certification program is not going to teach you that, or a math formula. Those are going to teach you to think inside that box that they need. And I always think that it's interesting when they say that, and then it's like, but it's right here. It's right here in art class. Just you have it in your hands. That is the solution. But it is really interesting. And I sorry, I can get off track with this, I think, just like you can.
Yes, for sure.
But I do want to think, kind of considering all those things, if, a teacher is preparing to meet, like, even with their principal, it doesn't, we're talking a lot about legislators and policymakers, but even with their principal, even with maybe their curriculum coach or something in their district, how can they prepare to really make that case effective, to make their case effective when they go in there?
So the number one thing that I usually tell arts educators when they're talking about, when they go to talk to whatever audience, or local, state, whatever, or local as in their own school, is that advocacy for us can seem very self-serving, because a lot of time, like when you go and you advocate, you're advocating for your job, and you're for all intents and purposes, you're advocating for your job in a way. And so I tell people they have to remove themselves from the equation. It's not about you. Keep it student focused. Like, why is this good for students? One of the phrases I detest in education is, it's what's best for students, because I've learned over the years of teaching that generally when people use that as their go-to, it's really what's best for them. They're just using the students as like a shield.
It may not be what the students need.
Yes. And so I'm a big one when people will come to me and say, it's what's best for students. And I'll say, well, show me the data that supports that. And so, like I mentioned earlier with the schedule, we knew, my visual arts teacher and I, we have an awesome working relationship. We're very good friends, both at school and outside of school. And we had known for several years that our students were getting cheated in their arts education experiences, due to the Monday classes, because of all of that. But it wasn't until I sat down and I analyzed the data and showed how it was going to impact students, not me, because it would be easy for me just to go, oh, I don't care about this, But for me to say the kids are going to get more arts education, this is what we're going to be able to do. This is going to be, these are the experiences students are going to be able to gain from this extra time. We could even build this in and really keep it student focused. Then that's when the decision makers started speaking up. We've noticed for years when we go to legislative offices, when I talk, when other music teachers talk, they listen to us. But when our college students that go with us speak, because they're students and they're not yet in the retirement system and they're not yet collecting a salary, they listen to them more. When
Yeah.
I've taken letters from children or cards talking about the importance of arts education to them, they read those and listen to them. And so I think the number one thing is when you're talking to your principal, your superintendent, curriculum director, whomever, keep it about the kids, keep it about the students, because they're the beneficiaries of whatever decision happens, or they're going to suffer because of whatever decision happens. So always keep it student focused and make sure that you're keeping your students at the center of whatever you're doing for arts education, whatever you're advocating for.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it is important, we talked earlier kind of about how, you said you can't do it alone. You have to have other people that can go on those, during those weekdays that can do kind of some of that stuff. You do need your parents there. But yeah, you also bring another good point. It's the student's voice. We do need the student's voice as well. So if an educator wanted to empower their students, especially if they taught kind of older ones or even the fifth graders that want to sneak out of class and put letters in the boxes, how can they empower their students to be advocates for their own arts education or the arts education that they want that they may not be able to have?
Right. So I think that, there's so many fine lines we have to walk as, educators, because, you can't like start a revolution with your students.
Yeah.
I would not encourage anybody doing that, especially if you are non-tenured. But like one thing, that a personal thing that happened in my teaching career, there was an administrator one time that thought that a music class we had was not as good as another music class could be, and made that known to everyone that this musical experience was not as valid as this other musical experience. And the music experience, the one that was not as valid in their eyes, was my general population students that didn't choose band choir. They were kids that were general music kids that we were doing. We had a world music drumming ensemble. So I actually went to my students and I said, hey, what do you learn in this class? And they kind of looked at me puzzled, and I said, all right, let me give you some background. There's someone that is saying that this class is not important and we should get rid of it because they don't feel like this is as important as band or choir. And the kids kind of looked up, and I said, so what are you learning here? And then the kids started, I learned how to do this. I learned how to do this. I learned how to do this. So then I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. We're going to learn how to write a letter today. I said, when you start a letter, you start dear, and then you put the person's name, or you can put to whom it may concern. Introduce yourself. Hi, I am blah, blah, blah in the 7th grade at blah, blah, blah school. And then tell them why this class is important to you. What do you learn in here? How does this make you feel? What does it do for your self-esteem? What does it do for you as a student? What would school be like for you if you didn't have this class every other day or every day? And then end it with, I would love to talk to you more about the importance of blah, blah, blah class. And sincerely, and sign your name. So I collected 40 of those letters from the 40, because it was a drill music class, middle school level, and that's traditionally known as, they don't I took one semester, I took 80 kids to lunch, because they came during third period, during the lunch wave. And so I took those letters and I sent them through the courier to that administrator, and never heard anything more about it after that, because I let the students do the advocacy. I didn't have to say anything because it looked like something I really cared about, but when they saw it was something the students really cared about, it changed the whole, tenor of the conversation. It kind of ended right there, where this is a valid experience for the kids, and they could see in black and white in their own handwriting why it was important to them.
Yeah.
And so I think engaging your students that way, not telling them what to say, giving them some prompts to
Mm-hmm.
think through, that's a great way that you can get them engaged in doing their own personal advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because if you start giving kids talking points like, you know, arts and the creative economies bring in $6.3
Yeah,
billion
they're
dollars,
not gonna.
an adult told them that, and that they're being a parrot instead
Yeah.
of talking about why it's important to them. And so I think engaging them in doing um, the real work of talking about how the arts are meaningful to their personal life, that's the
Mhm.
important thing that students need to, their voice is very important in that work.
Yeah, really connecting it. I like that idea too of like really connecting it to that personal meaning for them, like you said. And I think they're more, you can tell even as an adult advocating, you can tell when somebody is not really passionate about what they're saying. It's
Right.
very obvious. So I think that's a good point, even for adults. Um, so we do have a few minutes left, and I do kind of want to look at just looking ahead really broadly, that kind of predictive advocacy that you were talking about. Um, we do have like so many incredible things going on, not just in music and theater and dance. I mean, I've seen so much great things across the state that are happening in arts classes and educators that are just just putting in so much work every day and their own time and their own money. But then we also have a lot of things that, looking ahead and looking even now at some reactionary things, we've had a lot of funding cuts, federally. It's a very shifting kind of landscape right now, not just for arts, but for education in general. So what do you kind of see, as people are thinking about like, what do I need to be aware of, in advocacy as kind of our biggest challenges, our advocacy challenges for arts education in Alabama right now?
So I think, like I said, I talked to somebody about advocacy just earlier today, and one of the things I said to them at the end of our conversation was, really, the arts are better off in Alabama than they have been in the entire 25 years that I've been teaching, and before, the 4 years before the 25 years as a college student. So in the almost 30 years I've lived in Alabama now, you know, the arts in some ways are much better. And I think it's because we do have groups like the Alliance, we have the groups like Amp Up Arts, we have the Institute in the Arts, we have all of these groups doing important work in different silos around trying to make an impact and working together too, like doing their own work, but finding ways to work together. And I think as we move forward and the funding is going to be kind of up in the air, we don't know what's going to happen federally. Never, I think we cannot underestimate the power of us working together. Like the arts have to work together. It's not music versus theater, music versus visual arts, theater versus dance. We've got to come together. And I can say the leadership of all of the different professional arts education organizations, we meet, every about every quarter to talk about
Mhm.
issues that are going on in our respective fields, so we can know how we can work together and how
Mhm.
we can really make sure that we're advocating for all arts education.
Mhm.
Yes, I'm a music teacher, but my children are theater kids and they are both heavily involved in theater. So I want to make sure that, that they have the opportunities in theater that they love. They love music too, but they both really are involved in theater. So I'm going to advocate for theater too, but I'm also going to advocate for visual arts because I am the product of a musician and a visual artist, falling in love and getting married. And the visual arts are important to my family. And my colleague that I'm very close to in my school, visual arts, she's a visual artist and I want her field. I also want dance. We don't have a lot of dance programs in the state, and we have incredible dance educators in the state. And we need a certification for dance education in the state, like we
Yeah.
do for music
Yeah.
and visual. Me, like I want to work with everyone to try and get those things done. So it's not if I work for music, I'm not going to work for everybody else. It's going back to that yes and. Yes, I can advocate for music, and I can advocate for visual arts, and I can advocate for theater, and I can advocate for dance, because they're all important. And every kid has different interests. And
Yeah.
so they might not find their place in the arts and music, but they might find it in dance or theater or visual arts. So I think we're going to have to band together and work together moving forward, because and I think we're going to have to stand up. The ones that music is, we are the biggest in the state. But I think we're going to have to stand up and say, when we see things happening to our colleagues and in our other disciplines, and say, this is not right, and music needs to stand up for other areas too. That's the big thing that I see moving forward, is we're going to have to really move into a mode of, we've got each other's back. We're seeing it happen nationally. All of our national organizations.
I was going to say that coalition that they've formed,
arts
I think,
education
is a great example. Yeah.
And so I really think in our state, there's going to be some very interesting times coming up, and some belt tightening times. We're going to have to work together to advocate for arts education in general.
And I will say, because I was going to let you mention it if you did, but if you didn't, I was like, I want to make sure and get that in, that, just if anyone is not aware, there are educator associations for every art form in Alabama that can also help support these efforts. So like Rob, you're with the Alabama Music Educators Alliance. Association, sorry. We also have the Alabama Arts Educators Association. We have the dance one. We also have the Thespians for theater. So we do have those too. If you're really just like, I really need to support and resources of like, what can I do to help my students or advocate for them? We do have those associations here that, have been incredible in supporting teachers and advocating. So I did want to give you guys a shout out. I was like, if Rob does I want to give them a shout out, because they are here, and you're not alone as an educator, in finding those resources or having those support groups. So thinking about that, and that idea of coming together and really, and like we've seen that at the national level, some really good things going on, because of all those funding cuts. They came together really quickly and collaborated, and have been really successful in that. What gives you hope about the future of arts education in Alabama?
So seeing our national organizations work together gives me great hope, because I can remember a time when we were all in our silos and no one worked together. Every time I'm around my colleagues in the other arts disciplines, it gives me hope that we're going to see a path forward. Serving on the State Council of the Arts is also something that that's a side that I never expected to get to serve on the State Council on the Arts. But sitting there and hearing all of the wonderful arts experiences that happen every day in this state, and getting to hear about glass blowers in Fort Payne, and theaters that have been renovated in Atmore. I mean, just the arts are alive and well in our state. But we're going to have to move forward, and we're going to have to be the ones that stoke the fire to keep that fire alive, with everything that's going to come down with cuts or not cuts, or whoever our governor may be, or whoever our elected officials may be, or whatever happens. We've got to be the ones that tend that fire. It's our time now. But it gives me hope to see everybody working together, because like I said, there were a time when we didn't work together. We were pitted against each other, and it was well, if they get this, I don't get this, and I don't want them to have this, because there's enough pie for everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think that gives me great hope moving forward. Also, kids always give me hope. I mean, to look at the kids in my classroom, I don't advocate for my students. I'll be honest. I teach in a really great school system that is pretty well funded. Like, it would be unheard of not to have arts in our school system. I mean, something major would have to happen. But I also taught in Macon County, Alabama, where I was the only arts educator in the K-12 school. If they got visual arts, they got it from me. If they got music, they got it from me. I did some dance. I won't I would never show anybody that, but their arts experiences came from me. And so a lot of times when I do go and I put my boots on the ground somewhere and I advocate, I'm not speaking for the students that I currently teach now. I'm speaking for the students that I taught in the past, the students that I know that are still in schools without arts educators, that are still in areas that are arts deserts in our state. Because my kids have, my personal children, they have an abundance of arts experiences to choose from. And then there are some kids that live 45 minutes away or 30 minutes away that they have hardly any arts experiences. So I think that's the thing that we've always got to think about is, like I said, keep kids at the front and also keep those places and realize that our context is not the context of everyone else. And just because we might have it good doesn't mean everybody else has it the same way. And so as we advocate moving forward, we've really got to be the voice for the children in West Alabama, North Alabama, Southwest Alabama, the Wiregrass, the areas that they don't have arts experiences in this, or they don't have a fully realized community arts infrastructure that can help to fill that in. And so I'm really glad that we have groups like Amp Up Arts that are taking arts experiences into schools and into communities that otherwise they might not have any arts experiences. So as we move forward advocating, I think that's the thing we've got to do is we've got to always remember the kids that don't have.
Yeah. And that's why that collaboration is even more important, because we do, I mean, like, we have the voice, you have the voice, that, and more of that experience to be able to see, like, what is possible, what could they have, and really be able to give them, that support in that. So that's super important. Well, Rob, thank you again so much. We're at our hour. I know we could keep talking about this for a really long time. We have before, so we've had lots of conversations about this, but I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate your expertise, all the support and guidance and help that you've always given us as an organization, as me personally. We really do appreciate that. So, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And just before we go, I do have a couple of reminders. So this webinar is recorded and it's going to be uploaded to our Amp Up Arts YouTube channel. So you can revisit it, you can share it with colleagues who couldn't be here live with us today. And our next Amplifying the Arts webinar is going to be Tuesday, September 30th at 5 p.m. And we're going to be featuring Ruth O'Connor. We're focusing on art educator voices next month. So Ruth is a fantastic visual arts teaching artist, practicing artist. And she's going to share her journey as an educator, her work in arts integration, so getting it into some of these core classes, and strategies that she uses to engage students and connect arts across subjects. So we'd love to see everyone there for that too. But thank you all again for being here tonight. And Rob, thank you so much for everything that you do for arts in the state. It does not go unnoticed, and it is very heavily appreciated.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, everyone have a great night, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.